not the rabble who scream revolution. They have not your interest at heart.
Oh my God, tear this dude apart.
Chaos and bloodshed are not a solution.
Dom Bondar, third year of a Bachelor of Political Economics Social Science degree. And look, political affiliations, proud card-carrying member of the Liberal Party.
Yeah, sure, okay. Any particular faction within the Liberal Party?
Look, all those factional stuff, that's internal party matters. We don't discuss that, and, it's not something I'm going to delve into now.
Okay, sure. Is it something that's going to affect the way, you vote on USU? Say, do you belong to a faction that is binding? Is that going to change your decision making?
Not at all.
No? So you're totally free to make your calls, just external to your political orientation?
Yep, look, as far as I know, there aren't any Liberals on Union Board, and, if I do get up, I'll be representing mainstream students, and students who I don't think generally have got onto Union Board before, so look, I'm going to be representing what I'm voted on for.
I appreciate that you don't necessarily want to talk about factional matters, but a recent Sydney Uni publication mentioned you in one of their articles about fracturing in Sydney Uni Liberal Club. Are you willing to go in at all about what happened there?
Look, that's all just unsubstantiated gossip. It's garbage, so, I'm glad the Sydney University Liberal Club is getting some airtime with your publications. It's normally not too positive, but, look, that's all garbage. And first and foremost, I'm here as a Liberal student. As you guys would be aware, clubs don't... the CNS ruling is that clubs can't provide any material resource for candidates, so I'm here as a Liberal student first and foremost.
Okay, sure.
Okay, so just a question we've been asking everyone. Can you tell us why you're running for board, basically, but you're not allowed to say it's because you love or like the union? Like that.
Well, look, it's one of those things that I always want to do. It's the bucket list of things to do before you finish uni. I also believe that there's room for a candidate that represents some people that perhaps aren't the first people that you'd think would be represented on union boards. So, say for example, people who are religiously inclined, people from the Catholic Society, for example, who have recently had a problem with their constitution. I'm very glad that that was resolved this morning. But those non-traditional people who aren't represented on Union Board.
Yeah, so that probably answers the next question that we were
Yeah.
going to ask, which is, so if you were successful and you were on the board and they were making those kinds of decisions, would you have deregistered the Evangelical Union?
Not at all. I would have fought tooth and nail right till the very end and voted against any such proposal. At the end of the day, and this is one of my points, one of my policy points, religious freedom should be paramount and clubs should have greater autonomy, full stop. To suggest that the Evangelical Union, one of these long-standing clubs inbuilt into the University of Sydney institution, would be deregistered based on these grounds is, ridiculous. People should have the opportunity to be involved with whichever club and society they want, and common sense should prevail with things like this.
Okay, sure. So that's obviously your stance on things like faith-based groups. Do you support clubs and societies having regulations aimed at preventing discrimination in a more general sense?
Could you give me an example?
So having regulations that say that you can't stop someone from joining a political group or a faculty group or a club and society.
Right. Well, I think, that's obviously, there's no room for discrimination. However, I also think there should be a fair amount of common sense used more broadly. For example, if I was a member of the Liberal Club and a liberal inclined person, which I am, I would find it odd to say go to the socialist alternate and run for president there. It's just these common sense things that sometimes get in the way.
Who would you rank one
So, like, if you weren't on the ballot?
Well, I haven't really put much thought into that. I would say number one, I'd put Esther Shim, and I know Esther quite well. She serves on the Sydney University Liberal Club executive with me, or did, as women's officer. And, you know, I know her quite well personally, and I think she's got the right values going into this union board election. Certainly I believe she's running on a similar platform in regards to religious clubs and the freedoms they should have. In terms of the other candidates, to be fair, I really don't know them that well personally. So, you know, first and foremost, I think I'd be happy to see someone who's got the right sort of values going into to be elected. So I haven't really read through much.
Sure. Could you elaborate a bit then just on what those kind of values or characteristics you would see in an ideal candidate?
Well, look, people should be passionate about running, and people should be passionate about the values they bring to the table. So I think generally you have to have a candidate that that believes that people should be free to do what they wish on campus. So student freedoms is one of my policies, and generally you should be able to do what you do on campus and not have, you know, people telling you off, that's not the way to do it, you can't do X because you know, there's a regulation against that. They should be committed to sensible student activism. So none of the violent protests that we saw, for example, earlier this year at the John Howard Debating Cup, or in 2014 also at the John Howard Debating Cup, or various instances that popped up over the past couple of years. They should be committed to sensible policy discussion and by no means any violent protest.
Okay. Do you see any role for like protest and other forms of like direct action as like part of a USU representative's role?
Of course. Look, protest in terms of a sensible, it's one of our fundamental rights. You know, for example, last year, Bill Shorten came on campus, and a couple of Liberal students, not only from Sydney University but across the state, gathered to say how you know, his proposed policies are leading Australia down the wrong track, and how, you know, Australia needs to repay the debt, etc. There's most certainly a room for protest.
Sure. And how do things like national days of action fall within the scope of that? Like, for example, I understand the education officers have been like coming around to candidates asking them to sign an agreement to not campaign during the NDA.
Yeah. Have
you signed that?
I've made it very clear that I won't be signing it, and in fact be campaigning against the National Day of Action itself. I wholeheartedly support what our government's doing in terms of education reform. I think it's necessary. And look, I just don't think candidates should be stopping everything and going to campaign against some policies which haven't even been put on the table. And at the end of the day, we should be campaigning for the entirety of that National Day of Action.
You've said you're a card-carrying Liberal and you obviously believe in those values quite strongly. Do you think the fact that there's already been a bit of a split in terms of not stopping campaigning for that period of time, can you foresee any difficulties working with other board directors in the future if you've got different values?
Not at all. Like I said, one of the fundamental values that board directors should have, and is being passionate about what you believe in. You have to believe in what you say, and you have to enact on the principles that you hold. So, look, I see no difficulty in having disagreements and having different opinions to people, and that's where civil debate and, you know, building consensus comes in.
Certainly. Okay. So, across the board directors who were elected last year, who do you think has been the most effective in their role and why?
Right. Well, I actually share a class with Alicia, and she is very energetic, and I thought she had a fantastic campaign going last year. So I'd say Alicia.
Sure, and as far as things she's achieved during her term, and also, like, I
Yeah.
think Alicia was elected the year before, she's in the second year of her term
Yeah.
now.
Oh,
So
right,
also,
yeah,
like,
yeah.
within the field of people elected last year, if you could identify
The field of
something.
people elected last year, well, I don't really have any preferences. I wish Jennifer Zinn would have been elected. I was campaigning for her campaign.
John, we've asked you a little bit about policies and we've asked you a bit about candidates all from the past. Do you think it'd be fair for the average viewer to be a bit concerned that maybe you're not the most familiar with what the board is doing right now?
Well, I have been perhaps not as attentive to previous campaigns, and that's because I've been very committed to my studies. And look, I think there's no qualms by having capable people fresh on the campaign trail, and in the student political realm itself. There's nothing wrong with that in my mind.
Okay, sure. So obviously to be able to sort of navigate the role of board director, though, you sort of have to have some sort of grasp of what the board does. Can you take us a bit through what your experience or involvement has been with different things that the board has done?
Well, little things like, say for example, the board chooses what type of food stocks to have at vendors, USU vendors. I was quite pleased to see Garlow's pies, for example, introduced across vendors across campus. Stuff like that makes me happy. Obviously, in between class, I love to have a Garlow's pie, and you know, it's one of those little things that the board delivers that you can personalise your campus experience and you know, personalise it for others as well.
Sure. As
Yeah.
far as the USU more broadly, like,
Sure.
what kind of, like, clubs and societies experience or other, like,
Right.
precursors to board do you have?
Well, obviously I've been heavily involved with the Sydney University Liberal Club. It's been my absolute favourite thing on campus to be involved in something like that with the alumni that we have. It's been fantastic to be involved with such a vibrant and active club. But also smaller things like being involved in other people's election campaigns, even as minimally as I have been. It's always good to get out and speak with other students to see what how they feel about things. It's always good to have that feedback mechanism, I think.
So do we maybe just want to start by you explaining your policy of reintroducing voluntary student unionism and scrapping the student services and amenities?
Right. Well, this is a view that's held by myself and many students, not only here in New South Wales but across the country. And look, there is a tremendous amount of waste, and students should not be paying the amount of money they do every semester to employ board directors. Board directors should be applying themselves in their positions on a pro bono basis. They shouldn't be paid to be student representatives. The SSAF, I don't believe, should exist because I think there's a figure, I can't remember on the top of my head, but it's in the millions, and students pay this. Not all students fully immerse themselves in campus life, so it's unfair that every student should be forced to pay a SSAF.
Okay, sure. So, put two follow-ups to this.
Sure.
Firstly, When you talk about trying to get like the average student who focuses on their studies and maybe works and just focuses on their life involved in things like board, how do you foresee that kind of student being able to get involved if board positions are like without a stipend and have to be voluntary? Because surely that does lock out a certain portion of those average students who may have to work.
That's true, and look, I speak from experience. I work and have worked since I was 14. I worked during the HSC on a part-time basis 4 or 5 days a week. And it is tough, but at the end of the day, being elected to board and representing people should be something more than just a job. People should be passionate about doing it, and that should be reward in itself.
Certainly, but to the extent that someone is passionate but maybe really cannot survive without working a bigger job and just can't balance those hours without being paid, would you just argue that they perhaps aren't the right people to do board, that they shouldn't have a position? Like, how would you allow for them to get involved in board?
Not at all. It's a question of balance. And look, I don't think that balance should come at the detriment of something like the SSAF continuing to be charged to people, all students who may not necessarily want to be involved in that sort of activity. There should be greater student freedom in that regard.
Certainly, okay, which I suppose leads me to my second follow-up, which is that other policies you have, like for example, like publications like Bondar being funded by the USU, how do you propose to fund those kind of things if you're scrapping things like the SSAF and introducing voluntary student unionism, because they surely are something that is niche to a certain degree of the population?
Well, look, you can fundraise, you can do all sorts of things, and I know with Bondar being the sales manager myself that fundraising is actually one of those things that is not often gone to as the first resort, but is quite a good resort in itself. We did a small business run, and we generated quite a bit of revenue for our paper, and we actually ran a whole edition based on that small business run. So there are many other avenues people can go down. And just on that policy, if I could add, it's so important to have a plurality of voices in terms of student publications. And for publications like Bondar, which have come such a long way and generated such a readership, I think it's fair to have perhaps, maybe not even to have it fully funded, but even for, say for example, a stand to be next to Honi Soit, just to have multiple newspapers, a variety of voices catered to all students, so everyone can enjoy the publications that come out of that battle of ideas we have on campus.
Yeah, so you've definitely said that you don't think that Honi Soit should be the only publication on campus, but given Bondar already receives USU funding, can you sort of tell us why your policy is different?
Well, coming back to the point I was making before, it's about having a plurality of voices, plurality of views on offer, and it's not all about funding, it's just about having it as a recognised and having the infrastructure there. For example, something as simple as having a stand that can cater to multiple newspapers or magazines on campus.
Sure, so would that be for other publications like the one I mentioned earlier, which is Pulp?
For sure,
Okay.
for sure. All I think one of the great things about coming to campus every week is seeing a new edition of Honi Soit or a new edition of Bondar. Sadly, we don't do it, as often as you guys do, but I think students would be able to have such a greater university experience if they had maybe a newspaper stand convenient for them to pick out whichever newspaper or magazine they wish.
Sure, but when you spoke about that policy initially in your policy statement, it was a bit more than just stands. Just
Sure.
turning quickly back to the policy model,
Yeah.
do you think you just sort of based around fundraising them? Would that be the sort of the main component?
Well, I'm just speaking from my experience having done it in Bondar. I think that's something we can do in the future, and I encourage other people to try it out because it's actually quite fun to get out as university students and as student journalists to try out different ways of fundraising. And coming back to the point about the SSAF, it's important we don't burden every student with a compulsory financial cost.
Okay, cool. So just moving along a bit, you've said that you want to simplify
Yep.
the union. Can you give us some examples of how the union is overly complicated, and in bringing the union back to basics, would that involve removing or reducing any current union programs, and could you tell us what those are?
Well, my model of simplicity is basically to have a look at what we have, look at the good things, and to say, all right, well, how can we improve them? We should be uncluttering things like the CNS program, which has cumbersome regulations, because clubs should be running clubs, not the CNS. We should have a situation where students are freer to do what they need to do. Just simple common sense changes.
Could you give us an example of like a cumbersome regulation you would get rid of?
On the top of my head, I would say something like O-Week. O-Week, I love O-Week, and one of the things that really gets on my goat is when, for example, we can't walk about campaigning in campaign shirts for our club and club or society, how we can't campaign outside our stall. Simple things like that. I just think to myself, well, if people are motivated to come to O-Week because they have, they want to be fully involved with their club or society, why shouldn't they be allowed to go campaign around, try and get people to sign up because they feel so strongly about it? Why shouldn't we be, say, for example, walking about campus in our t-shirts or standing outside our stall and saying, this is so fantastic, we're here because we're so passionate about this, you guys should join as well.
So you've listed Maccas on campus as your
Yep.
first policy, and I would like you to talk me through who you think that benefits, how you justify prioritising that,
Rightio.
why it's in the mix.
Just to correct it first, it's more corporate engagement, which is the broad overarching policy. But look, I went to UNSW the other day. I don't often go, but I did go, and I just saw all these high value, low cost, well known retail outlets on their campus accessible for their students. Your Guzman Gomez, Max Brenner, IGA, McDonald's across the road from Moraine College, all these outlets on campus, and I thought to myself, their students are greatly benefited at UNSW by having all these, like I say, high value, low cost, well known brands, retail outlets at their disposal. A lot of people would benefit. I know I have to drive down to Stanmore to get my McDonald's if I want to have McDonald's on campus. It's just those simple things that I come back to. Having these accessible for us would be fantastic, I think, and warmly received by many people.
Yeah, certainly. So do you feel that like the food outlets provided already by the USU are inadequate?
Well, they're not inadequate, but they could be better. We could have these, like I say, high value, low cost retail outlets that are loved by so many, such as McDonald's. Like, I think it's hard to dispute that McDonald's is, loved by many, to some people's detriment. But, it could be better and people would appreciate it, I think.
You've said you'd like to see more events for students on campus,
Yep.
like ANZAC Day. Why do you see it as the role of USID to prioritise hosting an event like that?
Not ANZAC Day, but rather an ANZAC week. And look, we have all these week-long festivities. We've recently had Queer Week, I think, and I think, considering the number of people who were University of Sydney students, staff, academics that went to fight in the world wars, I think there would be nothing better than to see a week-long ANZAC celebration week in these 4 years of the commemoration of the centenary of ANZAC. I just think, considering we've had people go off from Sydney Uni, a large number at that, we shouldn't just have an ANZAC Day dawn service, but rather a week that all students would be exposed to, maybe even a marketing campaign, just something to add on to what we're already doing as part of the centenary celebrations.
Certainly. So is it just ANZAC celebrations, or are there other celebrations you feel like the USU needs to be promoting?
Well, look, I think we recently got rid of Interfaith Week. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that was fantastic. I think I participated in that on my first year as a student. Interfaith Week, more cultural celebrations. I remember in high school we had a multicultural day, something like people would bring their, national cuisines to a small fair on Eastern Avenue. I could see that happening. Just more student events, and constantly having, I think, Eastern Avenue flooded with things going on can only be a good thing.
Sure, certainly. So I don't think we have got rid of Interfaith Week, but that's
Right.
I think a bit besides the point for that. So how then would these more events and marketing campaigns and such be funded generally?
Well, once again, I think within the current funding framework would obviously have to, look at how that can be done. I don't have access, or I'm not privy to that sort of funding framework or anything of such, but even if it's, say, the Sydney University Regiment volunteering their time as they did for the dawn service, I'm sure they'd do that. I'm sure there'd be students willing to help organise something like that.
Certainly. So you're broadly in favour of more voluntary participation in
I think so. I think people shouldn't be people shouldn't be forced to do certain things. There shouldn't be a compulsory aspect about a student's life on campus.
I suppose I mean voluntary in the sense that it's not a paid position in the same way that you discussed.
No, that's right. Yeah.
Do you think that the board should be able to discuss some kinds of issues, like say executive salaries in camera?
I think that should be done. I don't see it necessary for a camera to be in the room when people are discussing that. I think we're all grown-ups and people on the board can come to a reasonable outcome with the camera not being in the room.
Sure. So also in camera it just means that basically the board are just speaking by themselves and other people aren't allowed to be in there witnessing the discussion that takes place. Do you think that could have repercussions for things like transparency and students understanding those important kinds of discussion?
Well, as say, for example, if I can draw a parallel with the federal budget, I think maybe journalists should have a spot at the table or have a report handed to them, outlining, say, for example, like the minutes of the meeting. But to be in the room as a extra additional stress on the minds of people in the room, I think maybe a bit over the top. But definitely in the favour of transparency, there should be minutes of the meeting, a transcript or something handed out to it should be publicly accessible on, say, like the USU website's page or...
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so just to clarify at the moment, that is not the case in camera sessions about things like the CEO's salary for the USU, which is substantial, are held without any access for journalists like us and without detailed minutes about the discussion that went on. Would you support that status quo, or would you opt to make that more transparent?
Well, look, I haven't really thought about that. I'd obviously have to look into it a bit further and brief myself up on that before I give you a definitive answer. But I'm not in a position to say either way at the moment.
Certainly. If you're lucky enough to be elected, you're going to have to make some tough decisions at some times. And basically what I'd like to know is if, there came a time where what you felt were in the
Can you give me an example of that? Just
So, I mean the kind of like contractual obligations you have when you're a member of the board. So, for example, to prioritise like the USU, dealings, to not like willingly enter into conflicts of interest, that kind of thing, like the general duties you have to the USU by virtue of being a board director.
Well, look, I haven't looked over everything in the Constitution and your regulations as a board director, so I won't make any comments on that. But look, what I can say is I would put student interests obviously first.
Sure. So maybe to give just like one slightly more concrete example.
Sure.
A hypothetical situation where you as a board director were privy to information you felt were in the students' interests, but your fiduciary duties prevented you from leaking to those students. Would you like hold your duty to the board or give the students the information?
I would hold my duty to the board in an instance like that, but looking through the Constitution, there may be other places that other regulations which I don't think I'd be happy to say that I'd be bound to certain things in that sense.
Okay. So is that to say you can see a situation where you might consider like divulging that information if you felt it was sufficiently in the students' interest?
Not in that sense, but in the sense that if you were elected a board director, you'd have to be a proponent of compulsory student unionism. I wouldn't be, if I were to be elected, I wouldn't be happy to be a proponent of compulsory student unionism, because I believe if I were to be elected, I'd be not respecting the mandate that I would be elected on if I were to not carry through with my values of being a proponent of VSU. So I think that's a fiduciary duty that I would find a bit difficult to come to terms with.
Yeah. Okay. No, any further questions? Okay, we might wrap it up there.
Fantastic.
Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
Heed not the rabble who scream revolution. They have not your interest at
Oh
heart.
my God, tear this dude apart.